So I was editing a photo this morning and I was getting really into it. I was adding radial gradients and luminosity masking and dodging and burning. And by the time that I was happy with the finished product, I went ahead and hit that backslash key in Lightroom to see just where I had started at. And honestly, I was pretty shocked at just how far removed the finished product looked from the raw photograph. It looked like it was taken on a completely different day, and it really did not resemble the original photograph at all. And I started going back through my Lightroom catalog and doing the same thing, kind of looking where some of my photographs started and where the finished result was. And it kind of brought up this idea in my head, or kind of raised this question that is there such a thing as too much editing? So let's go ahead and jump into Lightroom so you can see what I'm talking about. So this is the photograph in question. It's a shot I took last year in the Simien Mountains in Ethiopia. And you can see on the left-hand side, there is a ton of light coming through and then hitting the mountains or the cliffs on the right-hand side. And there is some light hitting this rock here in the foreground. There's a lot of texture and definition in the grass down here. And then up in the upper right, there's kind of some moody skies over here. And none of this actually existed. This is all completely fabricated and added in post. So if I go into my develop module here and open up my masking panel, you can actually see that I have 14 different masks to redirect the light and add drama and moodiness to the scene. And if I go ahead and turn off all these masks, you can see just how flat the image is. There is very little definition to it, and of course there's absolutely no light coming in from the left-hand side. And if I hit that backslash key, you can really see just how uninspiring this original image looks. There are a bunch of dust spots up here, of course, but there's actually no light, there's no color, there's no definition. And in reality, this was actually taken on a rainy and foggy morning. So all of that light was completely fabricated. It was not there. Here's another example of my very heavy-handed editing. And this time the raw image shows an aerial view of a dried up lake bed. And you can see while the subject is quite interesting in terms of these, drainage patterns and everything, the actual photograph is not too exciting. There's absolutely no color and very little light in the photograph. And of course, it looks kind of weird with the stitching of the panorama I put together. However, you look at the finished product and you can see just how much color I was able to pull out of the ground here of the dried up lake bed. And I was able to warp these drainage patterns to fill the entire screen. I added a whole lot of light, a lot of texture to it, a lot of contrast, a lot of clarity. And actually, believe it or not, this photo placed in the top 50 of Epson's Panorama Awards this year. And what started off as a photograph that really is not very interesting actually became one of my favorite in my portfolio. Here's another photograph taken earlier this spring of some wildflowers in the Vermilion Cliffs. And I really loved this arrangement of wildflowers in the foreground, but I was not super thrilled about how the buttes in the background are off-center. And of course, there is very little light in the photograph. So in post-processing, I of course lit everything up, and then I physically moved over these buttes to become more centered. Here's another example of heavy-handed editing, this time with a wildlife photo. And this is from a trip to the Arctic of Alaska where we were photographing muskox. And of course, aside from the obvious misleveling of the camera, you can see that this is a completely overcast day. There was no light in the sky. The shrubs in the back are kind of past peak. The leaves aren't looking so hot. And then of course, because it was overcast, that means there was no light at all on the muskox. He is very dark and it's difficult to see him. However, when I was editing this, now you can see I had changed the sky to be a lot more blue. I pumped up the saturation and look of some of the leaves and shrubs in the background. And then I added a ton of light to the muskox so you can see all of the emotion in his face and his eyes. And I really wanted everyone to be able to see each of the hairs that are flying in the wind as he was galloping across the tundra. So I know this is going to sound a little bit weird, but oftentimes when I'm editing these nature photos, I'm kind of going for an approach as if I'm editing a photograph of a supermodel for a fashion magazine, where the end result is going for kind of peak beauty. And unrealistic standards aside, kind of these same editing techniques also apply to my nature photographs in terms of removing blemishes, making things curvier, stretching things out, and warping them beyond what was actually there. A lot of photographers will put fine art photography on their websites. And if photography truly is an art form, then why can't the editing process be subjective? I'm not going to go to a fantasy movie and start complaining that, oh, there's animals talking or they're going to another dimension and that's unrealistic, because that's not the point of the movie. Movies are not always trying to be a realistic representation of reality. Sometimes they're transporting us away from reality. And I don't think that there's any rule in landscape photography that says what you photograph needs to be a 100% true to life representation of reality. If what we are looking at is not photojournalism, then why should we care how realistic the photograph is? I totally used to be one of these people who was bitching and moaning and complaining online like some photography social justice warrior that, oh, that's photoshopped. Those mountains aren't that big. You added that rainbow. I can tell that's a sky replacement. And while maybe some of these criticisms are valid for some photography out there, really what I was angry at was not that they were editing their photos that way, that they were not true to life. I think I was angry because their photographs were honestly better than mine. And of course, this kind of opens up a whole other argument or a can of worms, in which case it might be difficult to compete with people who are editing their photos to be so fantastical, but that's probably another argument for another video. I think as long as you're not misleading people or misrepresenting the facts, then over-editing or unrealistic editing is totally okay. After a lot of thinking, I realized that the argument essentially boils down to just one question. And that is, which version of a photograph would you rather look at? If you're to hang something up on your wall, which would you rather hang up? The version that's a little bit more true to life in terms of it's accurately representing what the photographer saw through their camera? Or would you rather look at something that's a little bit more artistic in terms of the editing, that has a little bit more punchiness and a little bit more vibrance and saturation added to things? And the beauty of it is it doesn't matter because it's what you prefer. And with that, I would love to know what you guys think. Do you think there's such a thing as over editing or too much editing? Do you think I went overboard with my edits? I would absolutely love to know. Again, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.